In this video we will talk about Python and a brief history of Python. The Python, or the language, or the name of the language, is taken after Monty Python's Flying Circus TV show. And the first version, public version, was released in 1991. The author is Guido van Rossum from Netherlands, and he has been the lead author, the lead programmer for this programming language for a quite long time. And he stepped down 2018. Up to that time, he was like the main author, or every code change or the ideas of the language came basically from him. The language, or the Python itself, is successor for ABC language. So it took some better parts from the existing language. The new functionality was added and so on. And it has changed a lot during that time, which is normal for 30 years of existence. So, and it still is evolving as we are using it now. Based on the JOBE index, it is the most popular programming language in 2022 in spring. And this index says that about 14% of people or 40% of the usage or the popularity is for that language. The second one is C language. The Python was in third place 1 year before that, so it has increased, the popularity has increased. And based on the Stack Overflow, it is on the third place. The Stack Overflow survey, there are also different, basically not only languages, but technical, how to say, languages available to choose from, and then this is based on the Stack Overflow users who have taken this survey. And it comes after JavaScript and HTML and CSS, and about 50% said that they like this Python language. So the Python itself is an interpreted language, and the code is interpreted line by line. So basically you write code and the interpreter takes one line, executes it, then it takes the second line, executes it, and so on. In comparison, there are languages which are compiled, for example C. And what happens with compiled languages is that the source code, or the code you write, it is first compiled into machine language, or something machine can understand, and after that the machine code can be executed. So there are basically two steps. But the compiling step can already point out some errors. For example, if you have used different data types to add a string into number and or vice versa, so it can already see those exceptions or problems and point those out before you run the code. In Python, what happens is, in most cases, you get the error when the code reaches to this line where the error occurs. So it can be a problem. So in some cases, you can run the code which has certain problems, but you know those only when the program gets to those problems. And it might happen that in some cases, for example, the code depends on the user input. And in some cases you see the error, and in some cases you don't see the error. And that can be a problem. For example, if you test the code with some users who don't give bad inputs, and based on that, their testing, the code works. And now you publish your code or give the code to your client, and client starts using the code or the program, and some bad values are entered into the program, and then now you get the error, and you weren't able to see those errors beforehand. So in this sense, compiling the language can help to prevent some of those problems, but still, I mean, errors can still occur. But yeah, the main difference is that if you take compiled languages or compiled programming languages, then the source code or the file where you write the code is compiled into a machine code, and then it is executed. In Python, we take one line, we interpret it, so that every line is executed separately, basically. Of course, all those previous lines are still in memory, but the interpreter only sees one line or one command at the time. Python is usually easily readable, so it was also one of the main ideas of this language. So it's if you see the code, it's kind of like written in English, so you can read the code as it's written in the code actually. So it's in that sense it's easy to understand. Of course, there are some complex structures and some complex ways to write things, but mainly the basic operations are quite understandable. It works on different operating systems, so you don't have to worry too much about getting your program run in Linux or in Windows. It also is supported by different mobile devices, different small devices, and so on. So it's in that sense it's very portable. So basically, a lot of computers or devices already have Python in those. It contains a large standard library, so it means that if you have the language, you can do a lot with the standard library, which is already built into Python. So you don't have to get some additional third-party libraries to do stuff. Although it also has a huge amount of third-party libraries available. It's very common or popular to have machine learning things. It has different web technologies and web servers. It has gaming libraries and so on. So it's widely used in different areas. And in that sense, I would say it's very easy to start with. The Python is very easy to start with language, and also it's very easy to kind of get complex things into working. It might lack some speed. So if you compare the interpreted languages and compiled languages, the compiler is able to make the program faster. So in the sense that it compiles everything into a one big machine code. And now, for example, C programs are often maybe even 10 times faster, because Python has to interpret every line, and it does basically the compiling step inside execution. So it has to interpret the line, it has to find out what it has to do, and so on. And compiler has done this already beforehand. So maybe if the compiling takes 10 seconds, it takes this time, but it's done only once. And now if I run the code, it's already fast. But in Python, every time you run the code, it has to kind of interpret the lines. Program code. Python can be run interactively, and it can be used as calculator. I have opened here Python interpreter. So basically this is like a terminal or command line where I can write some code. And as you can see, it expects from me some input. I can write, for example, 4 plus 4 here, and it tells me 8. Of course, this is nothing so serious or special, but what Python can do is it can, for example, calculate with large numbers. So in some calculators you have some limits, and it can even take some, let's say we try to take this into in the power of 23 and so on. So you can do something like that. Also it supports parentheses, so I can do something like that. So it knows that it has to add the numbers before multiplying and so on. So you can do quite a lot already with the interpreter. Of course, you can write real Python code here also, so I can print out something, hello, and so on. So it, okay, so I, sorry. Now I can write some Python code, so currently it prints out hello, and I can do variables, I can do functions, I can do loops, I can do whatever. But usually what we do is that we write code into a file, and then we run this file. Here, this interpreter basically, or the interactive command line, it gives us a way to run those basically one-liners at the time. So I can, of course, write several lines here also in some ways, but basically what it does, it kind of executes one command or one statement at a time. So yeah, if I have for example, sometimes if I have some small, simple task or calculation, I often use this interactive Python console. But if I already want to do more, I rather write the file and then execute it from the file. And yeah, usually we write code into the file, and this file can be executed. The file extension is .py. So for example, hello.py, and py as Python, and then we can execute it. And if we execute this file, then we take one line, we execute it, we take second line, we execute it, and so on. And when the errors occur, then we just see them in the terminal or wherever they are thrown or shown. So here's an example, very simple example, hello world. And what this program does, it prints out hello world. I guess it's quite readable already from the program, but let's see what happens here. So the first line starts with hash tag or hash symbol. Then this is a comment, and comments are ignored by the interpreter. So basically this is a way to write something into the code which explains maybe what's happening, or some in certain cases we want to write out what the complex lines are doing here, or give some pointers to the next reader for this code. And the print function or the statement basically on the third line or the second actual line in this code prints out the text onto the screen. So currently it prints out hello world. So this is a string or text, and that's why we are putting it inside the quotation marks. And the text or whatever is given into this print function, this is printed out to the screen. The previous file is stored, for example, in the file hello.py, and we can execute it in command line calling out Python 3, which is the version currently used. And then we have a space there, and then we have the file name hello.py. And what happens is that after execution, it prints out the following text. Of course, usually we don't execute code in command line, or depends how you use how you want to program or how you want to use Python. We often use the environment where we have all those executions under some buttons and so on. So we just press one button and it executes the code. So in this course, for example, we use PyCharm, but there are a lot of different kind of environments or programs where you can program. And in most of the examples where we write code, I also use PyCharm. So some maybe shortcuts and then some things I do there mainly work only in PyCharm, but we don't. It's not so important what we use. It's mainly about the programming language and so on. So it's nice to know how to execute the code in command line, although you maybe never want to do that. Here's an example of a program. and it's a bit bigger, but still a small program. Now, here the first line is also a comment, although it's written differently. So there is a triple quotation marks or double quotes in before the comment and after the comment. This is actually a docstring. We will talk about this in a separate video. So basically this is something which describes the current program or current contents of the file. So usually the first line of the program should contain this kind of comment. So it should be a sentence ending with a dot, starting with a capital letter, and so on. So it's quite strict how to write those. And then we have 3 lines of code. So the print line prints out a greeting. So hello, I'm your program. Now the second part asks the input from the user. So the input function is something which expects for the user to write something, and it prints out the text, what is your name? And now it's time for the user to enter his or her name. And the result of this input is written into value name. And now the third actual line greets the user by the name. So what happens is that the variable name is used in this print sentence. This currently we use F string here. This F symbol before the quote mark here indicates that this is a F string. We will talk about this in string videos, so you can see what happens there. But basically it allows us to use variables inside a string. Otherwise, in a string, every symbol is printed out as it's written in string. So if I don't have this F here, I would get hello, those curly braces, and then name. But with F string, this part is replaced with the actual value of this variable.